I am so speechless that I could literally just scream for half an hour and consider that my review. Hello everybody, it is Katie here, and we finally have Shadow and Bone. I don't have words. This discussion's gonna be a hoot because I honestly can't form coherent sentences. So as I've mentioned in videos before, I try not to take adaptations that seriously. I like to go in without expectations and just have fun with it. Generally, I'm an easy person to please. It's probably why I'm such a positive reviewer, because there isn't much that can anger or upset me. In adaptations anyway. In real life, everything can. But when it comes to Shadow and Bone, this show genuinely went above and beyond anything I could have imagined for this adaptation. I loved it so much. I mean, from the trailers, I kind of expected to love it because the trailers just blew my mind. And also I was really happy with the cast, so I was excited anyway. But, oh my god, what an experience those 8 hours were. I got to watch the crows come to life. So I've never done a full series discussion before, because usually if I'm reviewing adaptations it's either a film or a week by week show, whereas this is Netflix, so it dropped all at once. So I apologise in advance for the mess that is this video. I usually don't have structure to my reviews anyway, so this is going to be a million times worse. So I'm going to jump around a lot in this video, discussing bits from various episodes in seemingly no order. So I just want to start by saying that this isn't going to be a spoiler-free review, so if you haven't watched all the episodes yet, then be warned, I'm talking about everything. If there are any of you that haven't read the books but you watched and loved the show and are now looking at reviews, then I would like to warn you that I'm probably going to talk about spoilers from the books. So if you're somebody that wants to go and read the books for yourself and doesn't want to be spoiled for anything, then I just want to warn you, because I have no idea what's going to spill out of my mouth. So yeah, but I want to start by talking about what was probably the biggest cause of anxiety for us going into this, and that was how they were going to merge the Shadow and Bone story with the Six of Crows characters. I think the way they merged all of these characters together was so unbelievably clever. Making this a sort of prequel to the events of Six of Crows was such a good choice, because the characters aren't as we know them from Six of Crows, and their story was completely new to us, but then they also still felt familiar. Putting the crows into Shadow and Bone story, they just effortlessly merged them together. I loved it so much. It was a great idea to have the crows try to kidnap Alina. What also worked really well for me was having Nina and Matthias's story run alongside everything else that was going on, but they still found a way to include it by having Nina somebody who works for the Darkling. And the best part was seeing these characters come together at the end of the series. It was absolutely mad to see the crows in the fold to face off against the Darkling. For Inej to meet Alina, I was just utterly in love with how they mixed these two separate things together. And I honestly think that the Shadow and Bone story worked better for having the crows in it. I don't hide the fact that I am very much biased towards Six of Crows. It's the reason why I love this world so much. And whilst I do enjoy Shadow and Bone, it's nowhere near on the same level as Six of Crows for me. So if this series had just been an adaptation of Shadow and Bone, then I definitely don't think I would have enjoyed it as much as I did. Even though I will say the actual adaptation of Shadow and Bone was so beautifully done. It felt like they had just ripped scenes from my mind and put it onto the screen. I do think that the crows improved the story. And I know not everybody felt that way, because I've seen some people say that it felt too rushed and that there was too much going on, but for me personally, I quite liked how fast-paced it was. I quite liked the chaos. I just really enjoyed getting to see these two sets of characters that I love get to intermingle. So yeah, in regards to the crows being added to the story, I have no complaints. I actually really adored it. So whilst we're on the subject of me being biased towards the crows, I'm going to jump right in at Kaz Brecker. So Kaz and Inej are two of my favourite fictional characters of all time. Even though I don't really like to pick favourites when it comes to the Crows. I can't say that I love Kaz more than Jesper, because Jesper was my original favourite and I still love him very much, and they're kind of on the same level. I can't pick favourites, but just know that I love Kaz with my whole heart. So yeah, Kaz was one of the aspects of this show that I was anticipating the most. I just think he's such a fascinating character, so I was really excited to see him come to life on screen. I was not disappointed. So since the show aired, I have seen a lot of mixed opinions to do with Kaz, because I know people felt like he was kind of out of character from the Kaz that we know in the books. And whilst I agree that he did seem a bit softer in the show and he wasn't as ruthless, I don't feel like that was a problem for me, because I understand that this is a prequel. This Kaz is not the Kaz we know from Six of Crows yet. He still did have to work his way up to the reputation that he has in Six of Crows. So the fact that Pekka was able to attack him in the Crow Club, get the upper hand on him a little, the fact that Kaz made some mistakes throughout this series, it wasn't that big of a deal for me. It felt like we were just seeing his pre-Six of Crows state. I actually think that this is the thing that made episode 5 such a special episode for me, because you don't see that much of Kaz's scary side throughout those first few episodes. But then when we get to 5 and he's in the little palace and he ends up fighting with the Inferni, that moment is Kazbreaker. When he's literally crunching bones, that moment was just so spectacular to me, because that is the Kaz that we know from Six of Crows. And I think that moment was more special because you hadn't seen such an aggressive side to him until that point. And then also in that same scene you have Inej making her first kill to save Kaz. Don't get me started on how much I just loved everything about that scene. Kaz and Inej in this show, oh my god. So Kaz and Inej are one of my favourite YA ships of all time, because I love how their relationship wasn't based on any sort of physical intimacy because of the trauma in the past. With Kaz's aversion to touch and with everything that Inej has been through, their relationship is very different to anything else we see in YA romance. And that's definitely one of the reasons why I love them so much, because it focuses a lot more on their feelings and their emotions and their internal struggles with themselves to open up and let somebody in. So as somebody who enjoys that connection between them, the show was fantastic in that area, because Kaz is cold and angry, but then he's also willing to do absolutely anything for Inej. So right off the bat it establishes that Inej is something different for Kaz compared to everything else in his life. Every scene between them was just perfection for me. I love them. I love them. And I have to give props to both Freddie and Amita for how they portrayed Kaz and Inej, because getting to see some of my favourite characters come to life like that, it was just such a wonderful experience. So since I started with the Crows, I might as well continue with the Crows. Can we please talk about Jesper? Oh my god! Kit Young owns my entire heart for how well he portrayed Jesper in this show. He was Jesper. He was Jesper. Jesper was the character that first made me want to read Six of Crows, and that was how I found my way into the Grishaverse. So Jesper has always had a special place in my heart. So to see him on screen so perfectly, I'm emotional! We have to talk about Milo the goat, the best part of this entire show. That goat was such a genius addition to the story. First of all, Kaz carrying it was just so hilariously funny to me, and I don't know why. But then Jesper's bond with Milo was just so pure. That scene on the train going through the fold is honestly iconic. Milo is an honorary crow. Something that I particularly loved throughout the episodes was Jesper's friendship with Inej, because despite the fact that there was so much going on in such a short amount of time, each episode still did a great job of showing you the connection between certain characters. And I think the friendship between Jesper and Inej was such a pure and wholesome part of the show. I love how he said he would kill a man for Inej, with no hesitation. Get you some friends like that. I also really loved their conversation after Inej gets injured. When Inej is talking about what she needs to do after this, how she can't go back to the menagerie. And I loved how Jesper told her that he wasn't going to tell her what to do with her chance at freedom. That whole conversation was just so beautiful. So yeah, I'm really just in love with how the relationship between the crows worked. So technically we did have 5 crows in this show, but I will get to Nina and Matthias a little later, because I do want to talk about the Shadow and Bone characters, because as much as I'm biased, I still do love Shadow and Bone. Ben Barnes as the Darkling. If any of you watched my initial reaction to the cast being announced for 6 of Crows, then you will know how happy I was with the decision to make Ben Barnes the Darkling. It was one of the things that I was looking forward to the most in this show, and he did not disappoint. He's such a chilling actor. He's just such a good villain. So when it comes to the Darkling, another one of the major concerns I've seen from people with regards to the show was how early they revealed his name, because in the trilogy you don't find out that he's Alexander until book 3. Honestly, it wasn't that big of a deal for me. I wasn't too bothered. I did have a moment when he said it where I was like, you can't say that now. You need to build the suspense. But overall, I don't feel like it's that big of a deal. It's not going to take away from my enjoyment of the show. It's not as if they've spoiled his entire backstory, because we still have reveals to do with the Darkling to go. I liked the little bit of backstory that they put into his character as well, showing us when he created the Fold. I think that was a good idea, because one of the main questions that you're going to have is, why is the Fold there in the first place? What was the thing that triggered him to do that? I think that scene did a good job of showing us how much he truly cares for the Grisha and how much he wants them to not be demonized, to live freely. It helps you to understand that at some point he did have genuine reasons to want to change the world in his favour. So yeah, I was really happy with how they handled his story. So let's talk about Alina and Mal. If I'm being 100% honest, I did not like Mal very much in the books at all. But show Mal, however, can have my heart anytime. I love how they've improved on Mal in the show. I know some people will argue that they've changed his entire personality, so it's not the character that you know from the books, but as somebody who didn't really enjoy him in the books, that's a positive for me. I think the reason why I liked him more in the show is because he came across as less possessive. I feel like in the books he's very bitter about Alina and the Darkling, whereas in the show, although he still cares for Alina and he doesn't want her to go anywhere near the Darkling, he's not as full on as he is in the books. A good example of that is when they're in the forest and Alina talks about the choices that she made at the little palace, hinting at the fact that she had feelings for the Darkling, she might still have those feelings, and Mal didn't react to that in the same way Book Mal would have done. He just seemed more of a decent person in the show. You know, I didn't hate him in the books, I did like him in the end, but it took me a while to like him. Whereas in the show, I liked him right off the bat. Maybe that's down to the way that Archie portrayed him, but I think largely it's down to the fact that we just get to see more of his story in the show. Because obviously in the trilogy, it's in first person from Alina's perspective. And one of the aspects that I love the most about the show is that we get to see everything that's going on outside of just her view of things, which meant a lot more Mal. A scene where this worked particularly well was, I think it was episode 4, I can't remember what happened in specifically each episode, but it was when Alina realised that she wasn't getting any letters from Mal, and so something kind of snaps inside her at that moment, and she asks Genya to remove her scar. She starts improving on her power, but whilst she's improving on herself, we see that Mal is desperately hunting the stag through the woods because he knows that that's his one ticket to Alina. And we also get to hear his letters that he wrote to Alina that never got to her. There's that one scene where she's getting her scar removed, whilst he's being shot at by the Fjerdans. That was just some beautiful framing of a scene. I absolutely adored it. I also loved the scene in episode 2 where they're apart but both still thinking about lying in the meadow. And so you've got Mal in his sickbed recovering, and then you've got Alina in the little palace in this scary new world for the first time, and they both reach out their hands. I was not bothered about Melina in the books, but I just want the best for Show Melina. They deserve their happiness. I will say as well that another thing that I actually liked that the show changed up a little bit was the fact that they didn't kiss before finding the stag. I am a person who loves slow burn romance. It's what I live for in stories. When characters kiss too soon, I do tend to lose a little bit of interest in their relationship, especially if they're kissing in the first book of a trilogy. It's one of the reasons why I love the Raven cycle so much, because it takes the whole series to get to the romantic points of these characters. So I'm really on board with the fact that they didn't have them kiss in this season, because that's going to make you root for them to kiss in further seasons. It's going to build your anticipation. So yeah, I was really happy with their relationship in this series, which I didn't expect to enjoy, but here we are. So just talking about Alina on her own, I love Jessie's portrayal of Alina so much. I adore the changes that they've made to her character. I love how they've made her part Shu. So before we go any further, I do want to talk about the biggest issue I think that people have with this series, and that is the racism subplot being included. Because of Alina being part Shu, she does receive racist comments in the show. In particular, she gets called half-breed a few times, and the major problem arises when Zoya says it to her. I am a white viewer of this show. Being white gives me a certain set of privileges, and one of those is that I've never experienced racism and I never will. So it's really not my right to tell people how they should and shouldn't feel about those scenes. When looking at discussions about it online, I have seen varying opinions from people of colour who've watched the show. I know there are some people who hated that Zoya had to make that comment. There are people who don't like the fact that the racism was included in the first place. But then on the other hand, I have seen people of colour who actually appreciated the racism being brought into it and who weren't offended by the things that were said. And at the end of the day, all of those opinions are valid. Everybody experiences things differently. But either way, I think this is a situation where white audiences should essentially be quiet and listen to the feelings and opinions of people of colour viewers of the show, because it's their opinions that matter in this, not us. If people have a problem with those scenes, then that is completely valid, and you shouldn't tell them to not have issues with it, and you shouldn't try and explain it in a different way for them, because everybody is going to view it differently, and that's just the way it is. Personally, I don't think that the half-breed comment from Zoya should have been included, just because I feel like it's one thing to have racist remarks from characters who you're never going to see again. I think having that is a good way to show that Alina has been made to feel like an outsider throughout her life. But I don't think it should come from a character who you need audiences to love, because we know that Zoya has a much bigger part to play in this story. I think it's something that the writers can easily fix by having Zoya acknowledge and apologise for how she treated Alina. So yeah, it's just a case of seeing what comes of that conversation. I'm gonna have to speed it up a little bit because my camera's telling me I only have 7 minutes worth of footage left available on this memory card, and I don't have another one. I need better equipment. So I want to take some time to talk about Nina and Matthias. Early reviewers for the show were kind of hinting at that being their least favourite part of the series as a whole, because it felt separated from everything else going on. So I was a little bit worried going into it as to how their scenes were going to work. I was worried over absolutely nothing, because I completely adored Nina and Matthias in this show. Their scenes were literally just ripped directly from the page. I reread Six of Crows before watching the show, so those scenes were still very fresh in my mind. To see them just come to life like that, basically word for word, was so special. It was exactly how I imagined it. The major difference really came at the very end, when Nina had to accuse Matthias of being a slaver because the Darkling's Grisha ended up finding her because she was supposed to be working for the Darkling. So I think that little tweak to the storyline was so genius because it made everything fit in well together. And then of course we have the little scene on the boat at the end when the crows are talking about needing another heartrender and we see Nina in the background. I loved that moment so much. I cannot wait to see them all come together. Honestly, there was just so much to talk about that I can't possibly cover everything. But other little things that I loved in the show. Feda and Ivan. Oh my god. I don't know what the hell those two have going on in this show, but they look like a very happy domestic couple to me. That was something I didn't know I needed until this show. Genya and David were absolutely perfect. Even though we didn't get to see that much of David, he stole every scene that he was in. I cannot believe he got the cane whack from Kaz. That scene was so special, honestly. Especially because the book he was reading is literally an old Ravkan copy of Shadow and Bone. I'm so glad that we got to see Kaz whack somebody with his cane, but poor David. I feel like when I spoke about Inej earlier, it was mainly in relation to Kaz, so to discuss her on her own for a little second, I'm obsessed. I'm in love. She was utterly perfect in every way. I actually think that she was one of the best aspects of the show, just because she literally came straight from the Inej that I had in my mind. I loved all of her knives. I loved the way her spiritualism was portrayed throughout each episode and the way she was so faithfully believing in Alina. I appreciated the fact that we got to see some of the trauma that she has from the menagerie, and the scene with Helene was terrifying. I am so excited for the future of her character in this show. She can throw her knives at me anytime, and I would thank her. Which leads me on to that final scene on the boat in the fold when the Darkling expands it into West Ravka and we have that final showdown where all of the characters are involved and Inej just throws her knife right at the Darkling. Her energy in that moment. What an incredible power move that was. She can have my heart. Some other things that I want to quickly mention. So many of the iconic lines from the books were brought into the show and they were fantastic. Ben Barnes saying, "Make me your villain." Thank you. I am happy for the rest of my life. No mourners, no funerals being said in the final episode. What a moment that was. I love crying. I loved Jesper's little storyline with the stable boy. It did a perfect job of getting across how flirty he is. The show hasn't explicitly demonstrated that he is actually bisexual, so I worry that non-readers might automatically assume that he's gay. So I hope that that's something that the show changes up in the future. But I do like the fact that they got that scene in there. Alina and the Darkling is something that I feel was handled very well in the show. I like how they changed it up a little bit to have Alina be the one to kiss the Darkling first rather than the other way around, because honestly their first kiss in the book just seemed a little off to me, because the Darkling kind of does it randomly out of the blue and it just meh. Whereas in the show it's Alina that's kind of taking the first steps, and I know they said they wanted to make it more about Alina's consent, and I think they definitely did that in the show, so I was happy with the way that worked. The war room scene, an iconic scene from the book. It was put onto screen very expertly. God, there's just so many things from each episode. That's the problem with shows that are dropped on you all at once. It's impossible to talk about everything that you've picked up on in each episode. So I have to start wrapping things up before my camera shouts at me again. But overall, I absolutely adored this first season. I thought the effects were great. Nothing really looked cheesy. There were a few lines of dialogue in the first couple of episodes that hit a bit awkwardly, but honestly, every opening to a series has those initially awkward moments. I loved everybody's portrayal of the characters. Like, I honestly do not have one single complaint about the cast because I thought they were perfect. I think the show managed to take on board some complaints that people had with the original trilogy and improved upon those things. Despite the fact that the crows were added to it, it didn't take away from either the Shadow and Bone story or the Crow's characters. There are shows that I've seen that have not been as strong as Shadow and Bone, and yet they've still been renewed for multiple seasons. So this is a show that really deserves to get renewed. We need Nikolai and Wylan. We need them. We have to. Jesper's little foreshadowing for Wyland by mentioning the fact that they need a demolitions expert. Give it to us, please! So I know this video is kind of rushed because I was trying to cover everything overall, but if you would like me to do another video later on with like an episode breakdown or to just discuss things more in depth, then please do let me know down in the comments. Also, just share all of your thoughts with me. Did this show live up to your expectations? Did it disappoint you? Tell me all the things. I can honestly say that I'm just completely content with how the show has happened. I love it so much already. I'm very attached. Please give me more. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye!